Good morning, you guys. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Alexandria and I'm in the process of converting a Ford Transit into my home on wheels. In today's video, I am doing something that I have been terrified of doing, but it's finally time. I need to do this before really moving on with any other portion of the van to make sure that I have everything insulated properly before I start putting in the side supports and obviously my walls. And that project is installing these two massive windows behind me. Now I am doing this project myself. I'm hoping my dad can help me at least lift the windows up on there, but today is really just going to be a solid work day. Gonna try and get as much done as I possibly can, but I need to start by cutting out the holes in my van. I literally have not touched this project yet, and so you guys are gonna get to see the entire process start to finish. But before we jump into it, if you aren't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below to see more videos like this and my van life journey down the road. Once I finished cleaning and degreasing the outside of the van, it was time to start marking the edges for the pilot holes. I went about a ½ inch from the edge, which ended up working out perfectly for my doors, but make sure to measure for your own as I'm sure they are all slightly different. This is where things started to get real as I drilled my pilot holes and realized that there was really no turning back. I honestly think that this was the first project, or the first part of a project, that went as planned, and I finished on time. It only took about an hour or so. So now that that is all done, I'm gonna go ahead and take some tape and mask off the edges so that when I take the jigsaw in a few minutes, it won't scratch up the rest of the van. But before I start cutting, I'm also going to go ahead and take a straight edge to mark around the edges of this template, just to give myself as much support as possible when I'm actually up there to cut straight lines. Alright, so after having to stop a couple times because the jigsaw is like shooting metal into my neck and whatnot, I decided I would go get a buff. I'm just gonna wear this up around my nose and my face and my neck so that way I stop getting hit in the face. It really burns. Even though there's small shavings, I think after a while it's going to probably start to show, and it's also just hurting. So I'm gonna go ahead and proceed, but can't recommend this enough. Wear a buff or something else to protect your face, and also always wear safety glasses. So while adding a buff definitely helped protect my face, I ultimately did end up changing because I was getting metal shot at me everywhere. So if you're gonna do this process yourself, definitely wear protective clothing, protect your eyes always, and I'd also recommend a buff if you don't want metal shavings hitting you in the face. Once all of the windows were cut out, I went around and sanded them all off to make sure that there were no burrs that were going to cut into my hands, for one, but also for the gasket that I applied directly after this. Once things were all smoothed out, it was time to add urethane paint. Now I did this just because I wanted to make sure that the edges that I just cut and smoothed out were not going to rust. And so if you don't use urethane, I'm sure that it would also be fine to protect your metal with like a Rust-Oleum paint, but just make sure that you use something, otherwise you're going to have a massive rust issue later on. Up until this point, this video has been the definition of the calm before the storm. Right after I finished putting the gasket on and then sealed the edges again with urethane, which you're seeing right now, things took a turn. It was time to put on the Sikaflex and the polyurethane that goes around the edge to help seal the window to my door. Honestly, my only excuse was that it was a long day in the sun and I was tired and frustrated at this point, but ultimately this process was not terrible, especially as terrible as I just made it look. The windows went on really well right after we got the Sikaflex up on the wall, and I think it came out really beautifully. Once the window was placed correctly, I ended up putting some small blue pieces of tape around the edges just to make sure that it wouldn't slide as it dried. We repeated this process on the other side as well and finished up for the night. So it's been a couple of days since I last recorded, and that was intentional because I wanted to make sure that one, the windows stayed up and on the van, which great news, as you can see, they are still standing. And two, because I wanted to give myself some time to think about the things that I might have done differently and what would have made this process a lot easier. First, let's talk about how the windows came out. As you can see behind me, the windows look pretty great. You can see that there is a slight tint on them, but I most likely will tint them a little bit darker. It's definitely harder to see in the van than it is to see out of the van, and so I'm really happy with how that came out because it does really lighten up and brighten the space during the day. Now, I will be making custom covers to go over those because at nighttime it's very easy to see into the van, especially when there are lights on inside, which will be most of the time since I will be, living, working, and eating dinner and whatnot inside the van, and I don't want people to be looking in. Even with a really dark tint, I think that's still going to be an issue, so I am making custom covers not only for privacy purposes, but also, of course, for insulative purposes because I want to make sure that I didn't spend all of this money on insulating the rest of the van, only to have these two pieces of glass defeat the purpose. Overall, I would give the install process a 7 out of 10. It wasn't too difficult to do once I figured out what I was doing and I had a plan. I deducted a couple of points for a few reasons though. The biggest one being that the gaskets that these windows came with needed to be cut by hand. And I'll insert a clip here that shows you why that is an issue. There is kind of a large gap in between the two pieces that connect together, and I think that it would be fairly simple for Van Windows Direct or another van company to sell a gasket that is just pre-made that fits into the van so you don't have these rough edges that don't quite connect. And the second reason that I deducted a couple of points was because of the polyurethane. Now, I might just be weak because my dad was able to do it fairly easily, but if you saw the clips earlier during the install, I got very frustrated with putting that polyurethane on. During the process, I actually ended up bruising my hand, which I'm not sure if you can see this entire section, but it is still a little bit red and purple because I was squeezing the caulking gun so hard trying to get it out. I think that if I would have let it warm up more, even though it does say cold applied, it would have helped a lot, just thin it out and make it a little bit easier to run through the tube. But I did run out of daylight and I needed to get these windows up, so I didn't really have another option. Something I sort of improvised with was just taking a hairdryer and trying to warm the tubes up, which definitely didn't work very well, but I think in a pinch, if you have a heater or another source of heat that you can place these in front of, that might make the process easier for you as well. So the install process was a 7 out of 10, but I think overall, the windows themselves, I would give a 9.5 out of 10. From the outside of the van, they honestly look professionally installed, at least in my opinion. It was fairly easy to place the windows up and to make sure that they were aligned properly so that everything is straight. And from the inside of the van, as I mentioned, and as you can see from behind me, I think they look pretty clean. I'm taking off that half point just because of the gaskets, but I think that's more of an install process issue than it is an actual window issue. While I do still have a couple of things coming up in the near future that I am also nervous about, I'm very thankful that the biggest parts of my build, cutting out the ceiling and cutting out the rear doors, are over for now. I don't anticipate having to cut any other holes in the body of the van aside from one hole for my heater and another for my drain hole down into a gray water tank, which are much more low risk and very small in comparison. If you are thinking about doing this yourself, I would say just take your time, be patient, and watch other videos of people doing this. There are really great resources out on the internet from companies like Van Windows Direct. If you just search them on YouTube, they have a couple of install tutorials that will walk you through the entire process. Or you can find other videos like mine on ProMasters, Sprinters, and Transits alike. I was very freaked out about this. I thought that I was going to screw it up and I didn't think that I could do it. But at the end of the day, I think they came out great and I can't wait to see how they function when I'm out on the road. Alright you guys, that is all that I have for you today. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe down below to see more videos like this and the rest of my van build process and van life journey in the future. I'll see you guys next week.